All right.
Okay.
All right. So I will now call to order the meeting of the Governing Board of the Davis Joint Unified School District. Please note that consistent with the shelter-in-place orders from the Governor and Yolo County, this meeting is compliant with the Governor's Executive Order N2920, which allows for a deviation of teleconference rules required by the Brown Act. In-person attendance will not be permitted. We ask that you please email public comment to boe@djusd.net. All right, I will now do a roll call for each trustee. So Trustee Adams. Just say here. You're here. Wait, no, never mind. I can just
here.
Trustee Adams, D'Annunzio, Fernandez, Pickett, and Poppengay are present. I can just say that for all of us. And next item is item 3C, announcement of any decisions made in closed session. And there are no reportable decisions that were made during closed session. And now we have the approval of the agenda. So trustees, the agenda is before you. Can I have a motion to approve it?
So moved, Trustee D'Annunzio.
Moved by Trustee D'Annunzio. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. Trustee Adams.
Seconded by Trustee Adams. All in favor by roll call vote in alphabetical order. Adams.
Aye.
D'Annunzio.
Aye.
Fernandez.
Aye.
Poppengay.
Aye.
And then I'm also aye. So that's 5 in favor, no opposed, and no abstaining. All right. Item 4, public comment. Consistent with the shelter-in-place orders, this meeting is compliant with the Governor's Executive Order 2920, which means that we're taking public comment via email. Is there any public comment received via email on open session agenda items?
There's no public comment on open session items.
All right, so we'll now move on to the consent calendar. Our next item is the consent calendar. Do we have any public comment on consent calendar items?
No public comment on consent calendar.
Okay, so trustees, the consent calendar is before you. Can I have a motion to approve it?
Before we do that, I'd like to pull item 5C and do an individual vote on that.
All right. All right, so item 5C is pulled. And so we'll have a vote now on the rest of the calendar, unless there's other items that trustees want to pull. All right, so do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar minus item 5C?
I
So moved.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Moved by Trustee Adams, seconded by Trustee Poppengay. All in favor by roll call vote. Adams.
Aye.
D'Annunzio.
Aye.
Fernandez. Poppengay.
Aye.
And I'm also aye, so that's 5 in favor, no opposed, no abstaining. All right, so let's have a discussion about item 5C, which is to approve the employment contract for Laura Juanitas.
So I just simply wanted to put us on record as voting for this contract as a board in our usual roll call fashion. I don't have any questions about the contract. And I'm happy to make a motion to approve it.
All right, so we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second, D'Annunzio.
D'Annunzio. Okay, again by roll call vote. Trustee Adams.
Aye.
Trustee D'Annunzio.
Aye.
Trustee Fernandez.
Aye.
Trustee Poppengay.
Aye.
And Trustee Pickett. So that's 5 in favor. No opposed, no abstaining. All right, so we can now move on to item 6, which is 6A, which is the 2020 Next Generation Science Standards Materials Adoption.
Thank you, President Pickett. And let me turn this presentation over to Associate Superintendent of Instructional Services, Rodney Bunchoi, and Secondary Director, Troy.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. I'm sharing my content. Let's see. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, what was there for a second? There it is.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bose. Good evening, trustees. We're proud to bring before you tonight our recommendation for the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS, curriculum adoption. This is the culmination of over a year's worth of work and a truly practitioner-led effort by our elementary and junior high school teachers, all of whom have demonstrated collaboration, coherence, and ultimately consensus. Before we jump into this, I think it's really important that we bring several recognitions to you in this work. First and foremost, Ingrid Salim, our NGSS coordinator and elementary science teacher and junior high science teacher, did a fantastic and amazing job leading, orchestrating, mediating, and facilitating much of this work over the last year. We're grateful to have her representing our science program here in Davis Joint Unified. Also, shout out to Ken McKim, science teacher at Harper Junior High, whose knowledge of the curriculum and publishers worked out the best arrangement possible for our 7th and 8th materials recommendation. And then, of course, our very own secondary director, Troy Allen, who oversaw this process, supported our teachers along the way, and will now present our recommendation. Director Allen.
Good evening. Thank you. Roddy, we can move to the next slide. I would like to reiterate a personal thank you to all the teaching staff that engaged so deeply and thoughtfully in this work. This is one patient crew, given the span of time that it's taken us to move to this process tonight. I want to remind you that in February, we shared an adoption update with you that gave a detailed summary of the history of Next Generation Science Standards and specifically DJUSD's work. And in short, what happened is in 2013, the California State Board of Education adopted the Next Generation Science Standards, which launched us into a multi-year approach, both as staff and teachers. The new standards include what the students should know, and that means the disciplinary core ideas, and those are things like matter, energy, ecosystems. It includes what students should do, and that is using scientific and engineering practices, which is a fundamental shift. And it also identified cross-cutting themes that connect different domains of science. So an example of cross-cutting themes are like scale, systems, patterns, things like that. These themes exist in earth science or biology or chemistry or any science class that you can really think of. And in elementary school, we may ask students to notice, as an example, if we were talking about patterns, the patterns that they see in nature or can easily identify. And as kids move through the upper grades, they may be seeking patterns that they actually need mathematical equations to identify and make sense of. But those cross-cutting themes start at the earliest science education and take them through the most advanced. So you can see that with those significant shifts that we had to put a fundamental focus on understanding the standards and the frameworks through professional growth. And that was the critical work that happened from 2013 to recent. But what it also did is it means that our 4th through 8th grade teachers and staff that are bringing you this recommendation hold a deep knowledge for the framework and the standards that inform an adoption and the choice of the materials that support it best. Next slide. So as we start thinking about the process that the staff went through, the science teachers in the 4th through 8th grades participated in a very collaborative process to identify materials for pilot in the first place. They had to whittle down like a lot of options. The 2 programs that were identified for pilot in the elementary were Amplify and National Geographic. The 3 programs that were identified for pilot for grades 7 and 8 were LabAIDs, Discovery, and Amplify. And almost every DJUSD elementary school, our science teacher participated in the pilot, and all 15 of our middle school teachers participated. Teachers held deep conversations with students about students' opinions on the ease of use, whether the students felt engaged and challenged. They compared the pilot materials. The teachers came together repeatedly with an agreed upon rubric to evaluate the publisher materials, and they piloted the entirety of the school year to acquaint themselves and engage both student experiences and the outcomes that they were seeking. These same teachers met with frequency that culminated in May with every teacher that piloted present to come to the final adoption consensus meeting, and that's the data that I'm about to show you. I'd like to reiterate that we hold a deep gratitude for Ingrid Salim for her leadership and her just tireless work over a span of years to get us to the point where we were able to come to consensus and better understand the work that we were doing. And also to Ken McKim for his recent negotiations that will inform the professional development that we'll be engaging in the future. So with a little drum roll here, the DJUSD 4th through 6th grade science teachers decided almost unanimously to adopt Amplify. And the strengths of the program include a strong storyline, what they consider to be excellent digital simulations and modeling, as well as challenging writing and thinking prompts. Teachers recommend that Amplify be supplemented with hands-on phenomena for the very best student experience. And this program would translate successfully to distance learning. The adoption includes mostly digital resources through an online platform, and then small books to support each unit are included in the purchase. The 7th and 8th grade teachers agreed almost universally on lab aids, and the strengths of the program for them included strong hands-on and phenomena-based lessons, challenging writing and thinking prompts that use the language of the discipline, and a flexibility to allow for teacher differentiation. The science teaching staff note that the labs and the hands-on emphasis lend itself to traditional and in-person instruction. So as you know, the adoption cycle spans 8 years. But our history has taught us that we often have the materials that we adopt or we purchase and adopt much longer. In fact, our last science adoption took place in 2008. So this is because adopting a state framework and standards doesn't necessarily mean that the state is able to provide us money in order to make purchases for new adoptions. In this case, we will use the restricted lottery funds, which are designated solely for instructional materials purchase in order to make the one-time purchase. And the total price tag allows us to secure both the curriculum for students and teacher materials on all sites, including Da Vinci Junior High and DSIS, using projected enrollment numbers. And that bottom line comes down to $512,899. As we looked at that price tag, especially in our current landscape, I do want you to know that we did the math and we figured it out how many students that would impact over a period of 7 years. And what we learned is for $22.68 a student, we will be able to take care of our 4th through 8th grade students with this science adoption. Next slide, Roddy. So it has been our practice when we're reviewing recommendations for adoption to hold a public hearing and then to take action at a subsequent meeting. If anyone in our community would like to review the materials or learn more, they can use the email that we've projected above, and I will make sure to connect them with either the right resource or the right educator to get their questions answered. And now I can take some questions.
All right, why don't we go ahead and take questions in reverse alphabetical order. So Trustee Poppingay, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just one quick question. Since this is largely apparently online based, does that mean that it's updated on a regular basis? Presumably it's not like buying a textbook that winds up being, 5, 6, 7 years out of date.
Yes, our understanding is that the publishers are able to be a lot more nimble with what they upload or even correct as science, updates itself. The other thing to note is that it's available in Spanish for Chavez and for Montgomery, and that's one of the things that they're updating like right now to make sure that the materials are parallel, but that the instruction can happen in Spanish.
And do you have to pay for the upgrades, or is that included in the initial?
No, any adoption that you purchase is good for the term of 8 years, and the traditional experience was that meant you got workbooks for all of your students for 8 years. In an online format, that means that you have access to the digital materials updated for that 8-year span.
Thank you.
All right, Trustee Fernandez. Do you have any questions or comments?
No questions. Thank you.
Trustee D'Annunzio?
Yeah, just one question. We sort of lived this with the pilot program at Emerson and Da Vinci Junior High this year. Sort of the big takeaways in terms of our expectation for the impact it's going to have on our students' learning going forward.
I think that the big takeaway is it makes it so that our teachers are not having to do teacher created materials in order to get to the next generation science standards. It's really difficult for me to even articulate the huge shift in both what the standards held and in the pedagogy. And so this lends itself, I think, specific to Emerson and to that junior high age, what our teachers were telling us is for students to be able to do actual labs, to engage in the inquiry-based experience, and to practice the engineering practices and the scientific practices was huge for both engagement and their ability to differentiate. The other thing that they've really spoken articulately to is being able to teach students the language of the discipline. So to use vocabulary and to speak like scientists and ask questions in that format is really supported by this methodology.
And just one follow-up on that. So in addition to the curriculum, there are professional development modules. What, how do we ensure that we sort of, broad, consistent application across our instructors?
Yeah, that came out as a really high priority. Actually, on the when they were speaking about the teacher rubric, one of the things that they did to assess was like what level of support and how user-friendly would it be to new teachers that they were onboarding. But the other thing that came out of that conversation, especially during the consensus meeting, was a pretty deep desire to calibrate with each other which units of study they were going to do for how long in what order, so that they could use each other as teaching partners. The other thing that's important to say is that Kim McKim and Ingrid Salim were able to negotiate professional development that comes with the adoption in the future at zero cost to us, other than compensating teachers for their time if needed. And it's important to say that Scott Richardson and Ingrid Salim are considered SASP. I forget what the technical term is, but they've been trained to train teachers on next generation science standards through the Sacramento Area Science Project.
Great, thank you.
All right, Trustee Adams?
Yeah, so thank you, and appreciate all the hard work. One thing I noticed in middle school, the program is an integrated one versus discipline specific. Could you explain how you came to the decision to actually go with an integrated versus discipline specific?
You know, I'm wishing that I could remember. I think it was about 5 years ago. I know that decision was reached, actually, I'm going to say about the same time the standards came out, because in 2013, when we were engaging in that, at the time, I believe it was Clark Bryant, in collaboration with Ingrid and the science teachers, made a deliberate decision to move forward with an integrated model. At Davis Senior High School, they are not integrated yet. And so that's actually the work of our future, is to engage in a lot of professional development 9 through 12 to decide whether that changes program.
Right. So one of the issues in adopting this program is, one, we're confirming our integrated approach at middle school, but then we will also have to get our high school science teachers to understand what the approach was in middle school, and some of the things that their kids will have different knowledge and a different approach to science, right?
Yeah, I both agree, and I think the approach to science will be using the next gen science standards, the pedagogy and the practices. The real challenge is identifying the content that students get 7 through 8. And from what I understand about the high school courses, the question before us is how we integrate earth science into the existing courses, or even lean into the idea of a 3-course model that the UCs are asking us to consider. And, you know, I did some checking around with our peers, and many of the high schools are hesitant to do that big of a shift because of the number of honors, AP courses, specific courses to different trajectories. But it's an important question now that we're moving that way in the junior high, to think about a vertical articulation.
Right, regardless of whether we remain discipline specific or go to an integrated approach, there has to be some articulation. So the my other area of interest is the study of climate change and global warming. How do these materials address that?
You know, I know that I saw an Amplify that Ingrid Salim and I were discussing it specifically because it was California specific standards, and California has specifically called that out. I don't think I can speak to it credibly with the junior high curriculum, but could circle back to you.
Right, but for Davis parents who and our Davis students are concerned about these issues, it won't be put off in a different area where they have to learn it separately from science. They actually get to understand the science of those climate change and global warming.
True.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, I just have one question, and Well, I guess a comment first is again, just the work that went into it is greatly appreciated. And obviously this is a big undertaking. But my question is, we've been talking about ethnic studies and how either, we've been throwing around different models of it, but one model of ethnic studies is that it's kind of embedded in all of our courses or a subset of our courses. And so my question is, how might ethnic studies be complement, or how could it be incorporated into these new materials?
Robbie, did you want to take that, or do you want me to take a swing first?
Go for it. I have some thoughts, but take a swing.
I actually don't think I understand the content standards of what our science teachers are doing with enough depth to tell you where there are some automatic connection points. The part that I keep thinking about is that our science teachers have spent so much energy discussing different perspectives for like how scientists literally have like a world perspective, and they think about how one action has an impact that is bigger than what happens in their community. But I don't think I can give you a skillful answer without better understanding the content that each teacher is getting to.
I think it's a really interesting question, Trustee Pickett. The two domains that this kind of surfaces in my own brain, and we still have quite a bit of a journey to embark on with ethnic studies and with NGSS post the adoption. But one is pedagogical, and as Troy alluded to, and in NGS, you're scaffolded and supported to think like a scientist, to rely on inquiry as kind of a mode of discovery and of constructing new knowledge. And that's a very similar construct that applies to ethnic studies as well. There's a pedagogical foundation in asking questions and being able to understand the impact of various variables. So I think the approach in terms of learning science is similar, and there's an opportunity for collaboration. I don't know what that would look like, but in terms of the spirit of the instructional approach. And then the second is there's a strong focus on application and impact. So in NGSS, at a high level, not only are you looking for these cross-cutting themes, it's what they call the 3D, kind of the core pillars of NGSS. But you're also understanding application, impact, and the broader, well, I guess that's it, the broader application of these scientific principles in the world around us across the curricula. And so in ethnic studies, again, I think philosophically, there's a similar approach. But there's plenty of room for exploration and to see, what it might look like to understand NGSS and its impact, scientific impact on certain demographics, on equity, and in the social human condition. So that's a really, really high level kind of knee-jerk response, but I think there's room for us to get creative in the way we better integrate, these fields as they emerge, NGSS, ethnic studies, and others.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of kind of an example of looking at the water conditions in Flint, Michigan, right? So that's a case where it's affecting a particular segment of the population, and then it was, you can use that as an example when you're studying, doing, again, speaking to that application of, well, let's apply it to a specific, situation that would probably, I think, engage certain students. So if those examples are something where they can imagine that that seem more relevant, then I think that builds in, greater engagement and makes the whole science classroom not just this, philosophical or theoretical, conceptual, study, but also something that's really kind of concrete and meaningful to their own personal experience.
I'm so glad. Sorry. No, I'm very glad that you said that, because one of the things that the teachers pointed out to me was that the strength behind both adoptions was that they both hold a storyline for students, so that instead of scientific fact and practices that are out of context, they generally present a real life, if possible, scenario and story for students to get curious about, both scientifically and the application of the impact on the scientific community or the greater community. So I see great promise there.
And I think in general, as we move forward with whenever we're doing anything new, so, coming up with new CTE offerings, or, that we kind of if we dovetail it, then we can maybe, with ethnic studies, we can, those might be points where it's easier to integrate. So because you're building from the ground up, or they're already learning something new, so it's easier to incorporate then. So I was just thinking we should like keep that as a, in our minds as we develop any sort of new courses or programs or adopt new materials.
So could I jump in here just based upon the experience of my old job? So California instructional materials actually do have to show ethnically diverse people in different categories. It's by law. And then the science framework actually does have an access and equity chapter that does require these things, probably not to the extent that we've been thinking about now. And I think you're right to call out certain areas that might examples of where science can be applied in different situations that will draw the attention of the student that might not be there. But it's not without it, but I think we can definitely enrich it. So, but that's a good point. I really liked it.
Thank you. Thank you for adding that information, Tom. That's very useful. All right, so that's the only question I had. Are there any public comments? I didn't see any for this item. Maybe Superintendent.
No public comment on this item.
Okay, so there isn't, this is not an action item, and again, it will return to us. So we'll go on to our next item, which is item 6B, trustee vacancy timeline, application, and related materials. Let me just say, pursuant to California Education Code, Section 1590, sorry, this discussion is pursuant to that code.
Yes, thank you, President Pickett and trustees. And following up on our last meeting, wanted to provide an update and describe some of the materials I've shared. Last Friday, we posted to our website and alerted the media and shared on our social media channels the open vacancy, and let people know they can fill out a candidate interest form sort of as a placeholder until we develop our application form and a timeline. In 2018, the board interviewed 7 candidates. We've already received 15 applications, or sorry, 15 interest forms. So a pretty good turnout for just, 5 or so days down the road. Tonight, we'd like to ask the board to discuss next steps, which could include the establishment of a timeline, an application, and any other aspects of interview and selection process. Let me ask Maria to pull up the application packet from 2018. And we would look to update this however the board would like, but let's use this as a starting point. So we looking for the doc in the middle tab, please, Maria, candidate application timing. There we go. All right. Some basic information at the top. We did provide, I think, 7 questions. If you could scroll down a little, Maria, to the bottom of the page. There we go. So we could use these questions. We could craft new ones, use some of them. Page 2 has a timeline. And this can all be accomplished relatively quickly at the board's desire. We could also take as much time as we need. We could go to page 2, please. All right, and you can see in August of 2018, once we approved the materials at a board meeting, we made them available the next day. It was a short turnaround time, so that would be a point of discussion about the length of time the application period would be open. We posted those applications, the 7 of them, to the agenda item. Senior staff provides an orientation session for the candidates, and then in a live board meeting, candidates made a 3-minute presentation and a voting commencement process commenced by the board. So this is all open for discussion, creation, and amendment, but was hoping to, as a start, talk about a timeline. We can also entertain any questions before or after the board would like to discuss.
All right. Let's start with, well, let me ask, is there public comment on this item?
No public comment on the site.
All right. So let's go to trustee comments, and we'll start with trustee Poppington.
Okay. So, I guess just some general comments, and I'd certainly like, further discussion on the timing. It seems like with the example that we have before us, it was application materials available, then a week later, that was the application deadline. I guess I wonder if we would be better off extending it just a little bit, more than just maybe a week, to make sure people actually are aware of the process and the opportunity. Doesn't seem like we would necessarily be in such a rush, given the fact that this is, over a 2-year, appointment to finish out Cindy's term. I guess when we get into the process, I think it'll be interesting to sort of hear others' thoughts. I'm thinking, with the way we hire people at the university, we get the applicants, and then the applications are sort of looked at and ranked, and then say the top tier come in for an actual interview. I'm wondering, since we have such a large number of applicants, fairly quickly, or potential applicants, whether, initially screening the applicants, answering the questions that we pose, and then maybe select the top 6 or so to bring in for, a closer evaluation, maybe with community questions that could be asked of those candidates. I just throw that out there as an idea, so that we wouldn't necessarily bring in, 20 people. Might provide just a little bit more time with the people we feel are the top tier. And I would like to have some process where the community can propose questions that then we would pose to the applicants, maybe after a short presentation.
And Bob, towards your point about process, let me ask Maria to pull up board bylaw 9923, filling vacancy. And if she could please go to page 3, in the middle of the page under provisional appointments. And for the audience, the text provides, when authorized by law to make a provisional appointment to fill a vacancy on the board shall advertise in the local media to solicit candidate applications or nominations. A committee consisting of less than a quorum of the board shall ensure that applicants are eligible for board membership and announce the names of the eligible candidates. The board shall interview the candidates at a public meeting, accept oral or written public input, and select the provisional appointee by a majority vote. This is a board bylaw, so the board is able to amend those bylaws, to develop the process that they wish. But that is what it stands at for the moment.
So right now, all the applicants, if they meet the minimum qualifications, would be evaluated. So there wouldn't be a process for selecting the top few unless we change the bylaws.
Correct.
All right, just we can see, Trustee Fernandez, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable utilizing the previous application. You know, I kind of want to hedge a little. Based on Bob's comments that maybe we allow for more time. So I don't know if we call it a deadline of a week, but that we request applications be turned in by X date, like a week out, so that we may process and post as part of our public agenda for discussion, but not necessarily call it a deadline to prohibit us from accepting applications after that, I guess. So that's kind of where I'm at. I kind of want to, I'm pleasantly surprised by the number of interest that, number of people that we have that have expressed interest thus far. And I'm encouraged by that, and would like to get the process going, at least with those 15 or so people, so that we can get their applications back, so that we might publish them as part of an upcoming agenda, so that that's in the public sphere earlier rather than later, rather than say put a deadline beyond a certain date, preventing us from posting as part of our agenda, and then kind of waiting till the last minute, so to speak, to post their responses, because their responses to these questions, I think, are most important. So anyway, I'll be quiet, but say I favor adopting a timeline today that basically follows that, doesn't necessarily call it a deadline, but makes a request that applications be turned in so that we may publish them as part of our upcoming agenda, so it's part of our record. And whether we, and to be clear, not saying that we would post, or actually take up the item, or make an appointment at our next board meeting, but just like we have a COVID update as an ongoing item on our budget, on our agenda, I think that this is such a big issue that on meetings here forward, we should have this on as our agenda, so that, or on our agenda, so that we may bring it up and discuss it, and put information out to the public.
All right, thank you. Trustee D'Annunzio?
Thanks, President Pickett. I'm open on the process, so I'm certainly willing to take counsel from my colleagues. I maybe view this a little bit differently, Alan, in terms of a deadline. I do think we should, define a definitive. Here's when if you're interested, here's when you need to provide your interest, and make that a hard deadline, whatever that is. If we need more time, I'm open to more time. I agree with you. This is an important appointment, and we certainly want to get it right. As I look at the timeline that from 2 years ago, it was a little bit different in that I think there was some pressure to get someone appointed quickly, because the term was only for 3+ months. And again, I don't want to suggest we shouldn't be expeditious, but I think that needs to be balanced against being as open as we can to get any candidate, generate significant awareness, so any candidate who is interested has the opportunity to come forward. And frankly, I'm not in favor of contemplating a change in the bylaws. I think any candidate who is willing to submit an application, should be able to come in front of us in a public meeting and make the case, for why they should be selected. It may mean that we need to have, if we have 8, 10, 12, 14 candidates, it may suggest that we have a meeting dedicated to that issue. I don't know how practical that is, given all the other end of year things that need to happen. But I think if we do have that number of people, we need to be realistic of being able to listen to everyone, provide questions, and then go through the process. And I know the process last time took a little bit of time, and if we do have more than a dozen people, it's going to take some time to go through it. And then my only other comment, I don't feel strongly about it, but I do feel that, we've moved a little bit in the last couple of years in terms of, questions that might be of greatest interest. I don't want to slow us down, but looking at those, 7 questions, I don't think any of them are a problem, but I don't know that those would be the 7 that, that the 5 of us would pick, given the current circumstances. I do like the idea that Alan suggested of having, the community suggest questions, but I think that comes, during the conversation with the applicants as opposed to in the application process. I don't think I'd slow things down by getting comments from the community to put into the application. I think the sooner we can get the full application out, the better. I don't think I have any other comments. That's it.
All right, Trustee Adams?
There we go. Yeah, one of the questions I have for the group is, are we planning on making this appointment on June 25th? Or would we go so far as to schedule a meeting in July to make an appointment, or just as a reserve to do that? So that if we are going to make it on June 25th, then we probably should give people about 10 days, which would then give them till June 19th to submit something. That's a Friday. The other thing is, I agree with Joe. The questions are not bad, but they could be updated. The number 4 on the structural deficit should be updated to reflect the current budget situation. I think we also might want to talk about some of the issues that have come to the forefront and will be on future agendas, most notably the ethnic studies. I think you might also want to consider some of the questions are a little bit repetitive, and I'm just hoping that we could consolidate that and get it down to maybe 6 questions. I'm just thinking number 6 deals with professional experiences and volunteer activities, and then number 1 says and talks about school or community activities. Could we kind of throw that together into one, and maybe either modify some others or add an additional question on that forecast some of the bigger issues facing us beyond the budget in the coming years. So, but those are some things I have out there and kind of would like to discuss through. But I think there are a lot of people who really want to do this. It's great, and I think they all deserve time in the sun on this, not simply in terms of written response, but actually coming before us and doing a short presentation.
All right.
I had a quick question, if I could.
Yes, Trustee Fernandez.
I'm only seeing the 7 questions. Is there, and then just name, address, and stuff. Is there just a general kind of your resume? I mean, what I'm seeing is name, address, and then 7 questions, and it doesn't give me any sense of just the overall background.
Yeah, Alan, the at the top of it, I have it open. If you go up a little bit higher, Maria, it says submit a brief resume with your application. Right after it says, answer the question.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess all I would say is I couldn't agree more that there are definitely questions that we would want to add and to or customize in light of the current situation we're in as compared to what these questions were. But I guess I would simply say that, I view that as, more interview questions these are just basic, background questions that I view as part of an application process, apart from what we will then conduct, which is effectively like an interview. And if there are, in fact, a dozen or so people, I would believe that I agree with Joe. This is an important appointment, and so we shouldn't feel rushed to make a decision. But if we have as many as 12, I think that we should try to maybe focus on that last June meeting to narrow it, the number to, half, 6 people that then we can, add and ask additional questions to, vet a little bit more, have the community more involved in, perhaps. I don't know. But I guess I would say I'm in favor of approving a timeline tonight so that we can start collecting information on interested people, and then really publish that so that the community can see it, and then using that last June meeting to maybe go through a process where we narrow it, and then go through further vetting and one more hearing or so in July for an appointment. I don't know. Those are my thoughts and kind of where I find myself.
Actually, Alan, I like that idea. It sort of gets to what my point was initially is, evaluate all the applicants, and then I'd like to spend a little bit more time with each of the applicants in terms of maybe asking a few questions. Maybe they could be generated from the community. I think in the past, we've just had them, as I recall, just present their 3-minute, they had their 3 minutes for a presentation, but there were no questions of those applicants. And they'd have to be the same questions to all the applicants, obviously.
So, Alan, were you proposing, just make sure I'm clear on that, were you proposing sort of a 2-phase process? So one phase, we talk to all the candidates, and then this sounds like the wrong phrase, but I can't think of anything else, kind of identify finalists or whatever that then we bring back for a second session. Was that what you were proposing?
Well, I mean, yeah, I sure. Just to be clear, sure. Yeah, I think that might be the best approach, and not even pick a number, but just like when we did the last appointment, through our voting process, there were there were a couple of different rounds that we went through, and so rather than maybe pick like 6 people, maybe we say we do a voting process where we conduct 2 rounds of voting on the the late June meeting. And then that leaves kind of people that, and it naturally narrows it for a July meeting that we would then intend to select someone or continue out the rounds until one person is selected. And then that gives us additional time to ask other questions and be prepared. And maybe if we were successful in narrowing it down to 3 or 4 candidates, then we can actually contemplate an actual interview type, where they're, before us on a Zoom call and, interacting. I don't know. It's just a thought. So, but that all kind of if everyone kind of likes that idea, then I think we start with saying, okay, well, what's our application? Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with this application and just saying, hey, this is the application. But no, there's going to be many, many other interview questions that you'll be expected to answer in written form and publicly throughout the process. But just to get going on, getting materials in that we could review and is out there for the public. So, yeah.
All right. So I just have a few comments. So I guess my first comment is that I think I see the idea of, gathering some basic information first, but there does tend to be a kind of primacy effect that's going to then shape later evaluations. And so if there are important pieces of information, then I think those should actually be asked earlier in the process so that they're kind of given the weight that they deserve. So I think we need to think about, whether it's, better to just figure out our questions, right, all the questions right away, at least the standardized ones, in terms of, what information do we really think is critical, and make sure we ask it early on, as opposed to waiting to get that information. And then my second comment just has to do with the questions themselves. So with number 7, so about ethics violation, and how to respond to conflict of interest, I don't know that that question is very diagnostic, in the sense that I think everyone's going to respond the exact same way. I don't think anyone would say, well, hey, I don't mind conflicts of interest, or I would. So I think, I think maybe we could, save space there by not asking that question. And maybe we can just say it's an expectation of all board members, it is, part of the job to not have these conflicts of interest, and to recuse ourselves when needed. But then also, kind of based on my, the discussion we had previously, I would like to see a question that that addresses the applicants. Well, basically says that, the board is designed to represent the community and all, segments of the community. And maybe a question that gets at the new board members, history, maybe intersecting with different community populations, or any sort of expertise that would allow them to, bring that to the board. So I would like to see some sort of question like that asked as part of the initial round of questions.
Could you think of a way to improve question 1? Because you mentioned communities, so.
Yes. So maybe, so in what school or community committee, in what school or community committee, or is that even right? Okay, in what school or community committee or activities have you been active? Describe your contributions, and maybe we could add, how have these activities, I guess, what communities have these activities allowed you to intersect with? I don't know. I mean, wordsmithing on the fly isn't my strength, but
I like where you're going.
yeah. So
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So we could kind of wordsmith that offline. And then 4 should be Davis faces tremendous fiscal challenges. What suggestions do you have? And how would you go about gaining support for those ideas?
Yeah, I agree. That's a good change to that.
So is it possible to give the questions a little bit of thought, or maybe even pose an additional question and send, I mean, we can't share, I guess, but maybe send those to John to come up with some questions that we feel are appropriate?
Yeah, so let me suggest a couple of 3 different options. One is what Bob described. Everyone could send, questions to me, then it would be up to me to, come back with document for you. Another would be to discuss this in open session on the 18th. Third would be to appoint 2 trustees to work with me, on that, crafting up the application.
So why don't we just have the president and vice president work on the questions with the superintendent,
Okay.
and then come back the 18th with some revisions, and then we'll approve it?
I'm cool with them just going forward. I don't want to wait until the 18th to then approve it and then put it out. I mean, my objective is to get applications in written form and publish them as part of our agenda, to be out there in this, public sphere as soon as possible so that the vetting can happen. I think the later we wait to approve some questions, which by the way, I'll agree to any of the questions you want to ask. I'm fine with these, and because when we have an interview, I'll ask my own, and I'll have an opportunity. But I think it's more important to get written responses and application materials out in the public so that the public can see who these candidates are and how they're responding. And I worry about waiting to a future agenda to delay all of that.
I'm cool with that.
Can I ask a clarification? Oh, I'm sorry, Cindy.
No, go ahead, Trustee D'Annunzio.
Just a clarification question, Superintendent Bose. When we went through this in 2018, were the applicant applications, their answers and everything, they were part of the public materials that were published in advance of the board meeting?
Yes, those interviews took place on August 16th, 2018, and the 7 candidates' materials were published with the agenda item 6 days before.
And so my only comment there, Alan, is if we were to do something like that, I would think we'd have to publish those after the deadline, because it potentially advantages a candidate if you push some of them early and they can look at responses and then, and then submit their application after seeing how other people respond.
Yeah, I think the date is the same for everyone, and we publish everyone at the same time for sure. I agree with that.
So I thought I understood what Alan was saying is that the superintendent working with the president and vice president would finalize the app and get out there by Friday. And then the real question is, when do we set a deadline to get the applications in? Right. I thought you wanted it out like this Friday or something where people could start working on it. And
yeah, I mean, I like the idea. I like that idea of them. I mean, I love how we just kind of assigned work to our colleagues.
But nothing to do, Alan. I'm good.
but yeah, I mean, if you guys could do that, I'm fine with whatever questions you decide, and if you guys publish it or post it by this Friday and have a deadline of next Friday that submissions in, so that when we post on the 19th for the 25th meeting, we can post everyone's responses.
Well, can I make a potential edit to that? So, I mean, I don't want to speak for President Pickett, but I certainly think from my standpoint, if we can make the schedules work, we can, have it done by this Friday. If we're done with the meeting on the 25th, although, we typically put the packets out on that Friday. I mean, we have a 72-hour window, right? So we could get people through the weekend, because some people, want to take a little time, and it might take them, they're busy or whatever. We don't want to disqualify someone because they don't have enough time. So could we go to the 22nd, to Monday the 22nd? So that gives people, if we put it out on the 12th, a full 10 days.
That's a good point. Yeah.
that's fine.
I'm fine with that.
Good idea.
Could I ask if we could have applications, say by 5 p.m. Sunday the 21st, so staff has the Monday the 22nd to, prepare for the agenda posting, get everything in order, etc.
Fine with me.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I assume that Joe and Cindy would accept some suggestions of
Yes.
any of us, correct? I mean, that's, yeah.
How is that worked on with kind of the Brown Act issues? Is that an issue? Should it come to you?
So I was really thinking we're going to modify question 1, question 4, and drop question 7. Is there something else someone wants to see? Because the more direct we give to Joe and Cindy, the better off we are.
Well, I mean, I tend to take some time to think about these things and maybe compose a question. They could use it or not, but at least they would have have it available if they thought it was a good question. Whatever input we can provide, I don't think we necessarily have to be more specific tonight.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, so if the Superintendent Bose, if the individual trustees share those with you, then we're fine, right?
John?
All right, yes, and then my task would be to bring back a document to present to the whole board.
Okay, so, but are you saying?
Well,
Sorry,
we could do this. We could, any suggestions go to the superintendent, and then when he has what he thinks is the final version, he ships it out to everyone to make sure no one objects to anything. Just to check in, like, did I capture everything?
I think
We want
once
to get into
those-
a kind of serial Brown Act meeting, so I think it's better we just take direction tonight and work with the subcommittee, or we come back as a whole board at another meeting to finalize the application. But we should not have an email back and forth among, different trustees, me, on these.
I'm fine with that, as long as if we had an idea for a question or modification, we could send it to you for consideration, whether it's accepted or not. I'd leave that up to you three.
All right, so I'm leaning towards the idea that we all submit any comments or wordsmithing directly to John, and then John puts it together. And I can just say now that I'm really just going to focus on question one, and trying to come up with what I was trying to articulate earlier about, intersecting with different segments of the population.
So what would be for everybody to send me their questions individually. Please don't copy other trustees. And then I can, take those and provide a final application that we would put up on the website. And we would advertise in the Davis Enterprise, social media, alert other media channels, and due date on Sunday the 21st for posting on Monday the 22nd for the meeting on the 25th.
And so what if everybody has an original question and we add 5 questions?
If it becomes too complicated, I'll let everybody know we need to come back at a board meeting to further discuss.
I think we may, I don't know. I think we may be overcomplicating this. I think it's not like we look at these questions and go, they're totally out of realm. I think we all think there probably could be a couple better ones. I really like President Pickens' idea of enhancing the first one. I think we're pretty close here. It's not like we're building something out of, whole cloth. So I'm in favor of, we send our suggestions, the superintendent, kind of makes a final decision and publishes the application, because this is the first this isn't the determining factor, right? This is just gives us some background, to be able to then, have the session with the candidate in a public meeting.
And we just like to confirm we would like a resume with the application.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Very good.
All right, so does anyone want to make a motion kind of formalizing what John just said?
I'll make a motion that we proceed with a timeline that has applications out to the public by this Friday, with a deadline of Sunday, 5 p.m. The following week, and that the subcommittee of the president and the vice president of the board work with the superintendent and staff to adjust, make edits to additions based on input received tonight.
So let's go back and discuss that in light of our Brown Act discussion. So if they're all coming to me, then I need to complete the task and post the application. If it's feedback from everybody coming in for then review to two more trustees, I think we need to do that in open session.
Yeah, I'll be clear. I don't intend to make any changes to the application. That said, I'm highly confident that I will have other questions that I haven't had time to, put to paper if as part of the interview process. But
Very got it. Understood.
Okay.
Understood. Thank you.
All right, so does someone want to make a slightly different motion that gets us out of this Brown Act issue? Because we can't have comments coming to the subcommittee from other trustees. So it either has to all go to John or it has to be just the subcommittee.
I thought Alan's suggestion was all comments are made now from the other trustees, and then it would be the subcommittee of you and John and me to then make the final determination.
that I didn't intend my motion to say invite, other sort of unsolicited input to John. But do you want me to restate it, or would that be helpful, John or Cindy?
That would be great.
So, okay, I would make a motion that we proceed with an application to be posted by Friday after input from a subcommittee, which will consist of the president and our vice president, working with the superintendent, taking the discussions that we've heard today into account to make any modifications necessary to the questions. For that application to go out on Friday with a deadline of the following Sunday at 5 p.m. So that it could be posted prior to our June 25th hearing.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. Very good.
All right. Do we
I'll
have,
second that.
all right, so moved by trustee Fernandez, second by trustee Adams. And we can have a roll call vote in alphabetical order. Adams,
Aye.
D'Annunzio,
Aye.
Fernandez,
Aye.
and Papengay,
Aye.
and Pickett. So that is in favor. Actually, am I voting on this? I'm abstaining. So sorry. So that's 4 in favor, 1 abstention, and no votes. All right. So the motion passes. Hello?
Okay.
Okay.
Great. On? No, I think Cindy was waiting.
Oh, yes, very good. And we'll get to work on that and then in touch with the subcommittee.
All right. So we can now move on to the date, time, and place of next scheduled meeting. Do I need to make any changes to this, or are we talking about the next regular meeting here?
Next regular meeting on June 18th.
Okay, so the next regular meeting of the Board of Education is scheduled for June 18th, 2020. The board will convene an open session and immediately thereafter adjourn to closed session at 5 p.m. The board will reconvene in open session at approximately 6:30 p.m. and consistent with the shelter-in-place orders from the governor in Yolo County. This meeting is compliant with the governor's executive order N2920, which allows for a deviation of teleconference rules required by the Brown Act. In-person attendance is not permitted, and we ask that the public email their comments to boe@djusd.net. And then this meeting will be available for viewing live on cable television on DJUSD Education Channel 17, or you can stream the meeting at www.djusd.tv. We are now adjourned.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.